Hi, it's 7:49 in the morning, but I woke up 30 minutes ago. So Saturdays are usually a really good time for me to get some peace and quiet in the morning because I wake up about 2 or 3 hours earlier than the cats and my partner. So I'm about to make myself a cup of coffee and then get started on all the work that I have to do today. Okay, time to make some coffee. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today's video actually expands on a subject that I talked about previously, which is how fixing your priorities can transform your life. One of the most insightful things I have ever read was this quote that instead of saying, I don't have time for this thing, say, this thing is not a priority. So for example, let's say that you have a goal, like you want to go running more often. It's just a simple thing, right? So a lot of times we'll say, well, I don't have time to work out, or I don't have time to do this thing. But instead of that, try saying, running is not my priority, or working out is not my priority, and see how that sits inside of you. See how your body and your mind respond to that. And a lot of times what will happen is there will be this dissonance, this kind of like disalignment in yourself, because you don't want that to be the case, right? If you care about something, if you have a goal that you want to meet, it's really important to take out time for it. But a lot of times we can convince ourselves, well, I'm too busy, I don't have time. And like I've mentioned before as well, a lot of this boils down to whether or not you are taking an active role in designing your life. Your life is being designed partly by external factors, external variables you have no control over, but also by the parts you do have control over. And when you concentrate on taking ownership of those parts, you can see dramatic changes in how you live your life. I think this question is one of those fundamental life hacks that if you take it seriously can really help you go back to the drawing board and decide, hey, am I actually living the life that I want to live? Am I actually pursuing the priorities that are important to me? For me, for example, I think I always wanted to be an artist. I always wanted to be a writer, but I kept saying somewhere in the future I'll do it. I'll figure it out later on. I'll write a book someday. And then I started to get older, and someday started to look a lot closer. And then I started to see that if I didn't take action now, someday would become never. And that's pretty scary. So I took a step back and I looked at my life, and it's my life design is perfect by no means. I don't think that that's really something to aspire to as much as it is to continue trying to design your life and making sure that if your life does go off kilter, you can figure out how to reclaim balance over it. For me, I thought, okay, well, I want to be a writer. I want to be an artist. How can I do that? I can't do it full time because I still want a job. I still want to be a professional in the tech industry. But I do want to take out substantial time in my life to make that happen. The time that I had was early morning and evenings after work. So there was a trade-off involved. I could either sleep in, right? And I could socialize in the evenings as much as I used to, or I could start prioritizing the things that I wanted to do in terms of my personal goals. And that involved making that trade-off. So not sleeping in, waking up early, for example, which also necessitated going to bed at a reasonable time, which meant that I had X number of hours kind of defined in the evenings. And since that was the case, I had to be very selective about what I was committing to, the socializing that I wanted to do, that I was able to do. So living your life based off of your actual priorities, it absolutely does help you engage more in fulfilling activities. It also does ask you to choose between things because you can't be in two places at once. As much as I wish we could do 80,000 things at one time, it's not how it works. So the important thing is to realize there will be a trade-off. There will be circumstances where you have to choose between this long-term goal that you've had or this project that you're working on and immediate gratification, right? That doesn't mean that socializing isn't important or that interpersonal relationships don't matter. I would actually argue that they matter a lot. It's literally just about organizing your life in such a way where the relationships that really nurture you are the ones that you invest in. And I think going back to the old saying, no person is an island, that's actually pretty true. Each of us does need the support and love of people we trust. We need reciprocal caring relationships. So having goals, having priorities, it's not just about being productive in the classical sense of the word these days where you just do. No, it's actually about figuring out what areas of your life you want to be productive in, including your relationships, because you can have productive relationships and you can have unproductive relationships. Think about a relationship, for example, where two people are constantly at odds with one another. They can never seem to get on the same page. They seek to self-sabotage. They seek to sabotage each other. That's not going to be a productive relationship, right? On the other hand, if two people want to grow and change and they want to experience life together while doing that, that could be a really productive relationship. There's also not one definition of productivity. It essentially boils down to, what do you want out of your life? These are huge questions to ask. These are huge things to contemplate, but they're necessary, especially if you do want to take an active role in designing your life. Crisis situations barred, a lot of times we don't really take into account how much of our lives we are passively designing. We don't think about it that way. Our time flies by. We haven't taken inventory of where it went. We don't know when these big decisions got made. And we look back and sometimes there is that regretful element of, I wish I had done things differently. I definitely have a lot of regrets. Personally, I think that's fine. They don't crush me, but they are things that I look at and pay attention to so that I don't repeat those same mistakes in the future. And a lot of not repeating those mistakes has boiled down to taking a very deep interest in the design of my own life and designing all parts of it, not just one, not just my professional life or my creative life or my romantic life or my friend life, but just spherically trying to play an active part. One other thing I'd like to discuss is when we talk about figuring out our priorities, there are so many voices that come at us from society, from loved ones, from anyone who has free advice to give, myself included. But the thing is that it's about figuring out which of those pieces of advice align with your inner voice and which of those you can set aside because they're not for you. One way to make your inner voice louder than the other voices that are coming at you is to reflect. It's either to journal or to voice record what your thoughts are or to just sit somewhere and contemplate. I personally find that fleshing my thoughts out on a page or recording them is very helpful. I can refer back to them, and because just letting them out of me is actually pretty important, especially in my case and maybe for others who've had similar experiences to me, where for a good chunk of my life I was taught that you shouldn't say how you feel. You shouldn't talk about certain things that have harmed you. There's so much of a constriction on what some of us are allowed to say that just doing that can be so liberating. And for that reason, it's helpful to just get it out of your system. And I think what it does is if you have moments when you are figuring out your priorities where your confusion level actually goes up instead of down, which will happen when you're finally on your path. It's not like a straight line. There's just a lot that you have to figure out. It's doable, it's manageable, but it's absolutely a journey that has some rough terrain. So I remember feeling sometimes, and I still do, that, man, I feel like so much anxiety. I feel so much discomfort when I'm going through this personal development, when I'm figuring out what my priorities are. And I think it's totally normal to feel that way. And I think it's important to contemplate on it and write about it or voice record it, because that way it's out of you. It's not finding a breeding ground inside of you to grow weird anxiety flowers. Ugh. So circling back to that question, instead of saying, I don't have time, saying it's not a priority can be very telling. once you figure out those priorities, it becomes easier to start taking an active interest in designing your life, because now you know what to design it around. Now you know what you want to block off time for. And then that trade-off comes in, right? It'll be easier to make that trade-off once you have decided what you value. All right, until next time.